Order. I call Sylvia M to move the motion.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the International Fund for Israeli-Palestinian Peace. Mr Twigg, one of the most violent cycles of Israeli-Palestinian conflict in history, the largest since 1973, has drawn to a halt, and it's now critical, in my opinion, that we redouble our efforts to achieve and make this a lasting peace. The atrocities and massive loss of life that we've seen on and since October the 7th cannot happen again. We must do all we can to prevent that, and innocent civilians must be allowed to live their lives without fear. The recent news has been packed with talk of various reconstruction plans and government summits, but Mr Twigg, I believe the current debate is neglecting an absolutely vital pathway to peace, and that is the involvement of Israeli and Palestinian civil society. The International Fund for Israeli-Palestinian Peace is at its core an initiative designed to give agency to those often overlooked grassroots communities of Israel and Palestine. It plans to mobilise international investment in regional peace-building projects, and in doing so will tackle unaddressed drivers of this terrible conflict. That is why this government's commitment to the fund has been such a groundbreaking move, and why our continued support will be critical. Political discussion about the conflict is often fixated on the short-term weather of the situation, day-to-day events, and great tragedy in detail, but we neglect sometimes the climate, the long-term trends and initiatives that will bring us meaningfully closer to peace. And so I want today's debate, and my intention is to shift our political priorities to longer term, to looking at how we can create the space in the hearts and minds of all affected communities to make peace a possibility. And of course, how we accomplish this invites a great deal of discussion, particularly in light of our government's necessary and timely commitment to increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. And in this era of more limited resources being available, we need to be especially sure that the budget that we do have is going towards projects that are value for money in achieving security abroad, because security abroad means safety at home, and the British taxpayer must see those returns many times over. And I would invite other members today to make that case for why the International Fund could satisfy that requirement. One great advantage of the fund is the opportunity it presents for British leadership abroad. The Prime Minister has recently shown what Britain can look like as a leading force for good on the international stage, and seizing the initiative on civil society reconciliation in Israel and Palestine by championing the fund would be yet another demonstration of this power in a notably resource-efficient way. I hope that we have the courage to act and to keep the momentum of recent successes in the region going. As the examples of Syria and Lebanon show, political changes can occur suddenly and unexpectedly. Currently, however, these people and nations are suffering unimaginable pain and trauma. Innocent Palestinians have suffered catastrophic loss of their loved ones, their homes and livelihoods. And in Israel, at the same time, the images of the hostages are burned into the national consciousness, and the scars of October the 7th will be felt for generations to come. And therefore, with your permission, Mr Twigg, I'd ask that members allow accounts from victims to always be heard. And I personally have spoken with the families of hostages, and having witnessed such pain firsthand, I'd like to make my view clear that anyone who considers themselves on the side of peace should respect the testimony of innocents on both sides. It's not a zero-sum game. Reconciliation will take time, but history has told us that it is the only route to a lasting peace. And history has much to teach us in the pursuit of peace. In the 1980s and the 1990s, Northern Ireland and Israel-Palestine were both global symbols of intercommunal violence. But today, they look very different to one another. The enduring relief that the Good Friday Agreement brought to the people of Northern Ireland has sadly not been shared in Israel and Palestine. And there are many explanations for these different outcomes that I'm sure that other members will draw attention to. But I will note that while negotiations of the makeup of the Middle East often began and stayed at the level of presidents and prime ministers and leaders, the International Fund for Ireland ensured that as many people as possible were given a seat at the table and a stake in the future. Yes, I will, very briefly, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. My honourable friend is talking very eloquently about history and the need for grassroots history to be reflected. Does he agree with me that there's been a strong history of cooperation and cooperatives in the Middle East? Is he aware of the fact that the British Co-op Group has been working hard on this with the Cooperative Party around tangible measures to support peace and economic development, including the Wahat al-Salam Nev Shalom Peace Village? And do we need to see more of these initiatives in the future? And can the fund be a way of achieving that?
Well, thank you for the intervention. And I agree that cooperatives and cooperation is incredibly important within the fund, that we lose sight at our peril of the value of any civil society actor, including cooperatives. But I think what I would say in addition to that is, we recall that fund in Northern Ireland gave everybody a stake at the table, a say in their future. And the International Fund in Ireland may well have been the great unsung hero of the peace process. And we therefore have in recent memory living proof that a plan for civil society reconciliation backed by an international fund can succeed where possibly high-level talks may fail. In my opinion, no one is more fit for this task than the Labour government. Our party has a long and storied history in peacemaking, Northern Ireland being just one example of that. And equally, I'm eager that we build a consensus across the House on the fund. And I welcome contributions. Very, very briefly, and that will be the final one for me, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate him on securing the debate. Just a word of caution in terms of the comparison between the Middle East and Northern Ireland. In terms of the International Fund for Ireland, yes, it did make a difference, but the scale of the schism in the Middle East caused by October 7th and the scale of the rebuild that will be required in Gaza is such that a fund many times greater than the IFI will be required to make any meaningful difference in the Middle East.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. And I'm very much in agreement with him that we need to address the scale of the issue, certainly. And I think that's why it's very important that we build consensus across the House on this. And I welcome those contributions from members of all parties that are genuinely interested in a resolution. Democracy is one of the strongest tools that we have in the quest for peace, not just in ensuring our government does its part, but also in giving disenfranchised people a say in their future. We saw this clearly in Ireland, where the promise that people could express their political desires and views with a ballot in their hand instead of a rifle was a key to tackling violent extremism. And I've personally engaged in Israel's democratic tradition in my recent meetings with Yair Golan, leader of the opposition Democrats Party. He's an inspiring man who personally put his life on the line and has been a clear and consistent voice for peace and security. I also welcome Israel's continued engagement in the UK, but democracy will not be built and maintained unless there's a strong coalition of ordinary people and communities to safeguard it. Peace building, Mr Twigg, is not just about summits and large state initiatives. It's about the day-to-day work of people on the ground who are doing their utmost to set the conditions for ending hostilities. Mr Twigg, we know the government, in conclusion, is ultimately interested in peace in the Middle East and is taking a long-term view to that end. We've seen momentum build behind the fund amongst G7 countries. I want to be clear that this is the crux of today's debate. It's not about politicking or theatre or gestures. I've called it because I'm genuinely interested in long-term solutions and achieving the best outcomes in light of the realities that we face. The UK has the opportunity to take action and provide leadership. I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to the fund to date. I'm confident we can build on them in the immediate future. And as I draw my opening statements to a close, I'd also like to invite members on both sides to use this opportunity to make suggestions to the Minister on how the Government and the Foreign Office may move this crucial initiative forward. Thank you.
Yeah. The question is that this House will consider the potential merits of an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace. You can see a lot of members wish to speak, and I'm going to call the front bench no later than 8 minutes past 5. So we're roughly, at the moment, looking at 2 minutes. It may be less than that, but I'll call Jim Shannon and not waste any more time. Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and can I commend the honourable gentleman for Mansfield for setting the scene so very well. It is important that we focus on the most innocent victims of this enduring conflict, the children. Their futures are being compromised by the ongoing violence around them, and I do pray every day that they do see a future for themselves and indeed for each other. For Israeli children, especially those living in the border towns such as Sderot, known as a bomb shelter capital of the world for over 25 years, other communities within range of a regular Hamas missile fire, life is lived under constant threat of attack. These children go to school knowing that any moment a missile could be launched at them. Many suffer from PTSD, and their education and daily life is continuously disrupted by air raid sirens, evacuations and nights spent in bomb shelters. At the same time, the children in Gaza are also denied their hopes and dreams. Their education has been disrupted because their schools have been systematically used by Hamas and other terrorist organisations as military installations. Too many of these children grow up indoctrinated into extremist ideologies rather than the promise of peace. So if we are to foster a generation that chooses peace over war, we must ensure that children on both sides have access to education free from the toxic legacies of violence and hatred. This is where an international fund could play a role. It could also invest in educational programmes that promote and instill coexistence, tolerance and economic unity. Any such fund must be administered with transparency and accountability. Given what we already know about the politicised nature of the many NGOs operating in that region, it's very important that funds are not diverted towards movements that do not work towards peace. The foundation of this must be a democratic Gaza, free from the influence of Hamas terrorism and a complete rejection of Hamas' vision of the destruction of the State of Israel. Parents in Gaza and Israel are exhausted from burying children and loved ones. Children, by their very nature, are the future. I conclude with this. If we believe in a future where Israel and Gazan children can grow up without fear of each other, then we need decisive action. An international fund, properly administered and targeted, has the potential, I believe, to create the conditions for a sustainable peace with a secure and safe future for all children in the region. Thank you so much.
Again, I'm going to probably may be able to extend it to 2.5 minutes, but it's actually down. I'm leaving it as a voluntary thing. If you don't keep to it, I'll impose it. So Luke Akers is next.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I refer honourable members to my entry in the Register of Members' Financial Interests. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Mansfield, on securing this important debate today. As a supporter of a two-state solution to achieve an independent state of Palestine and a secure Israel, I welcome this opportunity to further our commitment to forming an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace, to build civil society and encourage reconciliation. I'm proud that before my election, I worked for 13 years as the director of an organisation called We Believe in Israel. But it wasn't just a pro-Israel organisation, it was committed to a two-state solution and national self-determination for both peoples, Jews and Palestinians. That role meant that I've travelled many times to both Israel and the West Bank and seen many examples of magnificent work to promote peace and coexistence, and met many inspiring Israeli and Palestinian voices for peace. An example of this is the organisation Roots, which is a grassroots movement for understanding non-violence and transformation amongst Israelis and Palestinians. It also means that the appalling terrorist attacks on October the 7th, 2023, and the subsequent dreadful war don't just relate to places that I've only seen on the news. They've affected communities and families that I've visited and met. And one of the things I find most painful is that the communities that bore the brunt of the attacks on October the 7th were communities that were deeply committed to coexistence and to helping their neighbours in Gaza. I have many more things that I could say about the situation, both as it was on October the 6th and as it has transpired after October the 7th. But the limited time that we have today and the need to enable more people to participate in the debate means that I will cut short what I was going to say and just say that I think that we need to launch a diplomatic process towards ending this conflict. But it cannot just be a top-level diplomatic process between leaders. It must involve a grassroots diplomatic and coexistence process that marginalises the enemies of peace with a new strategy. And we need to find the organisations like Roots that bring together Israelis and Palestinians and build genuine understanding between them, that educate communities away from the ideologies and ideas of violence and bring them towards the ideas of peace and coexistence, and provide every support that we can to those organisations that are struggling to build a sustainable, peaceful Middle East.
Gill.
Chairmanship, Mr Twigg, and I want to start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Mansfield. I want to pay tribute to the thousands of Israeli and Palestinian peace builders, including some of whom are here with us today. I want to thank you for your tireless and inspirational work, and to all Met for all you do to give them a voice. Thank you. You give us hope at a time when it's in such short supply. The last 18 months have been the most powerful for the people of Israel and Palestine, the most painful for the people of Israel and Palestine. The worst massacre of Jews in one day since the Holocaust on October 7th, a death and destruction in Gaza on an intolerable scale, and the torment of hostages held in chains for over 500 days. The ceasefire must continue to hold. The hostages taken by Hamas must be unconditionally released, and desperately needed aid must be allowed to reach innocent Gazans. Out of the rubble of this conflict, we must vow to create the conditions for peace. Our goal has to be a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and independent Palestine. How do we get there? First, we have to learn the lessons from the past. For decades, diplomats and politicians have invested countless hours in trying to achieve peace from the top down. Each effort ultimately failed. Why? Because neither communities felt they had a real partner for peace. And without public support, even well-intentioned leaders cannot impose a lasting peace from the top down. We know from conflicts like most notably Northern Ireland, diplomacy can make a lasting difference, not just as a result of a top-down approach, but a bottom-up approach as well. And I think of the Middle East Entrepreneurs of Tomorrow, a pioneering summer school programme which has supported over 800 Israeli and Palestinian young adults in learning computer science, social entrepreneurship and leadership skills. And MEET is just one of hundreds of such programmes which have emerged since Oslo. And we know they work. Just look at the data. 80% of participants were more willing to work for peace. 71% reported more trust and empathy for the other. And 77% had a greater belief that reconciliation is possible. And I commend the Prime Minister for his leadership. He has consistently supported that different path. And his commitment in December to convene a summit in support of civil society peace building is a vital first step. There's a unique opportunity for the United Kingdom. Our experience of peace building in Northern Ireland, our world-leading development expertise and the UK's convening power means this is an area where we can provide real leadership. As former US Secretary of State John Kerry said on why the Obama administration's diplomatic efforts did not succeed in 2014, he said, negotiations didn't fail because gaps were too wide, but because the level of trust was too low. So can I ask the Minister if he can provide us with an update on the preparations for the United Kingdom summit in support of peace building, and with the UK support in building peace from the bottom up, tackling the fear and mistrust which has only grown since October the 7th, we stand a chance in learning the lessons of the past and making sure the next effort at top-down diplomacy succeeds. We owe it to the people of Israel and Palestine.
Dan Tomlinson.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Twigg, and I also refer members to my register of interests. I want to start by my remarks, Mr Twigg, by saying that I very strongly welcome the ceasefire in Gaza, the release of the hostages, including that of the British hostage, Emily Damari, as well as to welcome the increased flow of aid into the region, which must continue. Undoubtedly, the ceasefire marks a crucial moment of relief after 17 months of devastating conflict, which was started by the massacre committed by Hamas on October the 7th. Too many have lost their lives, countless others have been displaced, injured or traumatised. And I know that the UK government, in partnership with its allies, will do everything possible to ensure that this ceasefire holds. But we must look to the long term, to a route towards a two-state solution. Of course, the path to peace runs primarily through political resolutions and will, through reaching a mutual understanding of the rights and freedoms that should be afforded to both Israelis and Palestinians. But we know too that civil society organisations can play a crucial role in this. And in fact, the political route to peace is made easier if attitudes on the ground shift.
For giving way. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. But does the Honourable Member think that a recognition of a Palestinian state in the first instance and then discussions around funding packages, and we've recently heard about the Arab Summit contributing £53 billion, supporting redevelopment and restructure within the Gaza Strip. But surely recognising the state of Palestine first must prevent the nonsense that we constantly hear about the Riviera by Trump and others. Does the member agree?
Thank you, and thank you for your intervention. I do believe that we have to get to a place, we must get to a place, we cannot lose sight of the need for a two-state solution for Palestine to exist alongside Israel. That is so deeply important, and it is the way forward in the region. To return to the point around civil society organisations, we know that they shape attitudes on the ground, and that is so crucial too. And they've remained, and even now, they are still integral to resolving this conflict with programmes that create new ideas, leaders and political dynamics, fostering mutual understanding and advocacy. I met civil society organisations when I visited the region, and it was them that gave me the deepest sense of hope that we could find a way forward and a way towards peace. Let me conclude by my remarks by saying that I do hope that the UK will continue to build on the Prime Minister's pledges towards the International Fund that have shown our commitment. And I would like to ask the Minister if he can seize the initiative further next week by ensuring that the matter of the fund is raised at the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting in Canada.
Kevin Van Der
Thank you, Mr. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I also want to congratulate the Honourable Member from Mansfield for securing today's debate. He alluded to precedents out there, and today I want to talk about a precedent where the UK has been a trailblazer on peace building in complex conflicts around the world, most notably in Northern Ireland. The attention of the world has naturally been drawn to the destruction and suffering of the peoples of both Palestine and Israel since the devastating Hamas attacks and throughout the subsequent war. I believe that we in the UK have a unique contribution to make in the area of civil society and people-to-people peace building in Israel and Palestine. In the mid-1980s, when a political peace process was non-existent, the international community decided to intervene at the grassroots level with an international fund for Ireland. and expert effort was put into investing in civil society to create the social, economic and political foundations for peace. 12 years later, the landscape of Northern Ireland was transformed with genuine constituencies for peace that allowed for the negotiation of the Good Friday Agreement. This model is one of the areas of peace building in which we in the UK have unparalleled experience. And today, thanks to the tireless work of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, support for an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace is cross-party, with support from members of Parliament from right across the House. Indeed, this is not just a precedent showing that the UK can take a leading role in the Israeli-Palestinian peace, but it's also one that shows a Labour government is particularly well placed to do the same. It was Jonathan Powell, then Downing Street Chief of Staff in the 1990s, and now the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, who led the Good Friday Agreement talks. He has characterised the International Fund for Ireland and its investment in civil society at a moment when peace seemed distant as the great unsung hero of the Northern Ireland peace process. Today, we have an opportunity to play a similar role in a similarly intractable conflict. That's why I'm so pleased that the government has indicated its intention to do so, most recently in December with the Prime Minister's announcement that the Foreign Secretary will be convening an inaugural meeting to discuss next steps with partners. So can I end by asking whether the Minister can provide us with an update on when the meeting in London will take place and which partners will be involved? And can I also ask what plans does the government have to use next week's G7 Foreign Ministers meeting in Canada to raise an establishment of an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace? It is unquestionable that this summit is a particular opportunity to make real progress that I believe only a Labour government in these circumstances can.
Sharon Hodson.
Thank you very much, Mr Twigg. And can I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this very important debate. Now, several decades ago, the conflicts in Northern Ireland and Israel-Palestine bore strong parallels to one another. They both faced large-scale terrorist insurgencies with urban warfare tactics that had never been seen before, deeply polarised populations and horrific damage wrought on innocent lives. Most importantly, they shared the fact that many sceptics painted the fighting as a product of ancient and intractable religious disputes and thus hand-waved away any prospects of peace. But today they look very different. Opposed interests on the island of Ireland now have a legitimate political channel and dialogue in the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement, while conflicts between those on the territory of Israel and Palestine arguably reached its highest intensity in over half a century prior to the recent ceasefires. Of course, each historical experience is unique, and it would be an oversimplification to take this comparison too far. But I believe we must always bear the Northern Irish example in mind in our approach to this fund and wider peace building in Israel and Palestine, especially considering our own country's first-hand experience of the disastrous consequences of unresolved conflict. In particular, I propose that we stand to gain from thinking about the Troubles in two major ways. Firstly, we can learn the lessons of the Irish peace-building experience, and whilst negotiations over Israel and Palestine, like the Oslo Accords, have been the largely top-down and sometimes entirely secret projects of men in smoke-filled rooms, the Good Friday Agreement was far more inclusive, paying attention to left-out voices, the unconvinced women and the international community. Much of the credit for getting civil society engaged in Ireland must go to the International Fund for Ireland, which our own Jonathan Powell has called the great unsung hero of the peace process. Fact-finding visits to Northern Ireland by Israel and Palestinian NGOs have found the IFI's strategic approach to funding with an independent body, tight public-private donor coordination and field officers from the affected communities made all the difference. Civil society has been the glue that brought the communities together and has continued to hold them together, even despite the increased uncertainty of recent years. I know I've got to sit down, but if I can just acknowledge what the Honourable Member from Northern Ireland said, that the new fund would have to be considerably greater, I will end my remarks there.
John Pearce.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Twigg, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member from Mansfield for securing this debate. I want to speak today in support of our Labour government taking a leading role in the International Fund for Israeli and Palestinian Peace. as envisaged by the Alliance for Middle East Peace and something Labour Friends of Israel has advocated for almost a decade. In recent months, there's been hours of debate in this place about how the UK can best contribute towards peace in the Middle East amid the horrific scenes of death, destruction and suffering on the 7th of October and the subsequent war in Gaza. As has already been said by other members, after the last serious peace process failed in 2014, it was said that the negotiations did not fail because of the gaps were too wide, but because the level of trust was too low. Today, trust is even shorter supply. Neither leadership is in a position nor mindset for the painful compromises that peace and a two-state solution would inevitably entail. This is a challenge for all of us wanting to kickstart Israeli-Palestinian peace process. And it is the challenge that only a bottom-up initiative like this, not rooted in the halls of power, but in civil society, that can seriously resolve. It is our job to change the lack of trust in order to build those constituencies for peace. This is a tried and tested model, as we have heard from Northern Ireland and the UK's role in that. As Jonathan Powell said, it was the great unsung hero of that peace process. I saw the potential myself when I visited Israel and Palestine in July 2023 for just such an initiative. I met with organisations and NGOs run on a shoestring who dedicate their work to providing spaces for Israelis and Palestinians to meet together, to work together outside the confines of conflict. Organisations like EcoPeace, which bring together Israelis, Palestinians and Jordanians to forge new and creative solutions to climate change in the region, increasing codependent and natural resources. Or the young Palestinian activists I met in Ramallah, working to train up the next generation of political leaders for the long-awaited elections in the Palestinian Authority and for a more democratic and engaged, pluralistic Palestinian future. Supporting civil societies like these is how we can play our part in changing the attitudes on the ground in Israel and Palestine. This is how we will build trust necessary for the genuine progress towards peace from the bottom up. That's why I'm so delighted that the Prime Minister announced in December that we would be convening an international meeting with partners to discuss how we take forward the G7's commitments to support civil society. And I look very much forward to hearing from the Minister about these plans, including when this meeting will take place and which partners will be attending.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you for the member for Mansfield for organising this debate. I'd like to declare an interest as the chair of the APPG for conflict prevention. Last month, I had the privilege to visit Israel and the West Bank. We were unable to go to Gaza, but we did visit some of the parts of Area C in the West Bank where we saw a lot of the Israeli settler violence and some of the demolitions in eastern Jerusalem. We also had the privilege of meeting some of the families of the hostages, in particular Aviva Siegel, who experienced a very difficult situation with her husband, who she had to leave behind after she was released. And in many ways, it's completely understandable that the trauma and the suffering on both sides of the conflict has led to such a polarisation of views across the piece. And that is reflected in the polls that you can see, both sides increasingly polarised, and also that we saw in our conversations with members of the Knesset, where we heard extremely extreme views around the continuation of the occupation for generations and a justification, really, of what Israel is doing in the West Bank. So we've heard from others about the UK's experience in Northern Ireland, how important that is in our positioning around taking forward this peace-building fund. And we're lucky to have members from peace-building organisations that work in the region with us. I was very happy to speak to them this morning, and that the good work that AllMap is doing is well-founded. We should recognise that a lot of that work is being really harmed by the USAID cuts that have happened in recent weeks, and it's now more important for the UK to step up to support these organisations. I've got little time, so I'll just wrap up. So I'm really pleased to see the Prime Minister's commitment to this Israeli-Palestinian Fund for Peace. I'd like to hear more details from the Minister on when we're going to take that forward, when the next meeting will be. Will we use the G7 meeting this week that Jonathan Powell is at to announce more details of this fund? And would he be happy to meet with the APPG, the cross-party group for conflict prevention, to talk about more of our work in this region? Thank you.
To Peter Princely, you actually have just over 3 minutes.
Well, it's a great honour to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Twigg.
So, decades of violence and displacement in Israel and Palestine have created psychological scars that will take generations to heal. For Israelis, the collective trauma of October the 7th is still all too painful. Magen Inon is an Israeli peace activist whose parents were killed on October the 7th. And he writes that it feels as if a flash of blood engulfs the landscape, and my grief is one small branch caught in the current. Everyone I know from my childhood has a horror story to tell. Yet Palestinians are reeling from the terrible destruction and loss of life in the Gaza Strip, tying into a wider historical experience of displacement. This cannot be described as post-traumatic stress because the trauma is ongoing. Gaza does not have pre and post. Now, the effects of trauma on peace building cannot be understated. Traumatized populations are likely to support violent and armed extremist groups. Trauma leads to a siege mentality, increased anger, and trauma means a continual drain on grassroots pressure for the ending of the conflict. So, it's vital that peace-building initiatives help to end these cycles of trauma and introduce a path towards healing and lasting peace. The newly proposed international fund will help us to do this, and it's critical that we build momentum for it today. Now, civil organisations in Israel and Palestine are already working with those who are terribly traumatised, but by the while also carrying on their own personal traumas and the daily harsh realities they face. So each day these organisations tackle the profound scars left by the cycles of war. Competence for Peace, the Middle East Children's Institute, the Holy Land Trust. Now all these, together with a unified fund, will deliver resource and support to make these small-scale initiatives society-wide, eradicate psychological drivers of conflict, and pave the path to healing. So I will close with Magen Inon's words. Our shared future is based on the belief that all human beings are equal and deserving of respect and safety. This is how I raised and how I am raising my own children. In the long term, even if it's very far away, the only real future is that of hope and peace.
The two opposition spokespersons will have 5 minutes each, the Minister 10 and a minute or 2 for the member to wind up. I therefore call Brian Matthew.
It's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, Mr. Twigg. I also thank the honourable member for Mansfield for bringing this issue to the floor. The Liberal Democrats have long called for a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders to the conflict in the Middle East. In the immediate instance, the current ceasefire in Gaza must be maintained, and both sides must advance talks on a second phase. This must include release of all the remaining hostages, including the bodies of hostages killed in Hamas captivity, and ensure that aid can flood into Gaza to relieve the suffering of Palestinians after 18 months of devastation. The UK government must also urgently engage with the Israeli government to ensure that it reopens aid routes and the supply of electricity in line with Israel's obligations under international law. Its decision to blockade and electricity entering Gaza is wrong and will only exacerbate the suffering of the Palestinians in the Strip. Beyond the immediate maintenance and progression of the ceasefire, a long-term and just peace must include the immediate recognition of the State of Palestine. My colleague, Leila Moran, has introduced a bill to each of the last 3 parliaments calling for the immediate recognition of a Palestinian state based on 1967 borders. My friend in the other place, Baroness Northover, has done the same. We must also work closely with those Israelis and Palestinians who are advocating for a just peace based on a two-state solution, which would bring security and dignity for all. There is no future for peace in the region unless moderate voices can influence and frame discussions on what a peace settlement looks like. This means addressing the source of resentment and fear for both Israelis and Palestinians, weakening Hamas's influence in Gaza, and the West Bank, and responding robustly to illegal and often violent Israeli settler encroachments on Palestinian land. This should include the UK government legislating to cease trade with illegal settlements in Palestinian territory. We must also work with the international community to identify future democratic leaders of Palestine with a view to having swift elections in Palestine as soon as possible in the hope of uniting Gaza and the West Bank under one democratically elected vote. This will ensure that there is security, safety, and a bright future for the Palestinians. We must invest in peace, such as via the International Fund for Middle East Peace, encouraging our friends in the Gulf states to contribute, and use trade as a tool for peace, ensuring that Palestinians and Israelis benefit. This is something which Liberal Democrats have supported for many years. We on our benches were pleased to hear the Prime Minister's express his desire to kickstart an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace, working alongside the Alliance for Middle East Peace, OLMEP, over the past decade. So over the past decade, there's been a stark absence of diplomatic efforts to address the core issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In this chasm, civil society organizations have played a vital role in promoting peace, justice, and equality. These organizations are advocates for diplomacy and non-violence within both societies. They educate and mobilize their communities, generate momentum for peace beyond formal political structures, reduce the political risks of new ideas, influence shifting public opinion, and contribute directly to political and diplomatic solutions. However, it must be said that the government's recent decision to cut the aid budget makes this project like this all the more difficult. The Middle East stands at a critical crossroads, although through the fragile ceasefire still holds, destabilizing rhetoric and actions threaten efforts towards de-escalation, diplomacy and conflict resolution. No single actor has ever been enough to secure a lasting peace, but the volatile language and policies from the Trump administration introduce new risks and opportunities for exploitation by extremists. The UK must work with our allies in Europe and regional partners in the Middle East to support the maintenance of the ceasefire, secure the release of the remaining hostages, and give Gaza the aid and its suffering people need. These are essential preconditions on the path towards a just peace, based on a two-state solution along the 1967 borders, which ensures security, dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you.
Well, Shadow Minister Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And let me start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Mansfield on securing this debate today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the incredibly fragile ceasefire that we have at the moment. And I think everyone in this House wants to see that ceasefire endure. And in aid of this, we need to see the return of each and every hostage taken by Hamas during those barbaric acts of the 7th of October 2023. We're all appalled by Hamas's cynical move to continue to hold hostages as human bargaining chips. These individuals, their families and loved ones have all experienced unimaginable pain over the last 500 days and more. The world has been watching as the hostages released so far have returned to their homes and loved ones. Many, of course, have not returned alive. So we continue to call on Hamas to immediately release the remaining hostages who have already suffered so deeply, and that is key to a sustainable end to the conflict. So I'd be grateful if the Minister could update us on the very latest discussions he has had with Israel, the US, the UAE and other regional players to help the parties reach agreement on phase 2 of the ceasefire. I'd also like to ask, what is he doing to ensure the UK is a proactive contributor in these discussions and doing its bit to keep the fragile peace together and support the deal moving forward? The Prime Minister has pledged his support for establishing an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace and plans to hold an inaugural meeting in London. Peace in the region is something we all aspire to, and the fund was first endorsed by the Conservatives in government in 2018. There are, however, some questions I would like to ask the Minister, starting with when will the inaugural meeting take place and who will be party to these discussions? Mr Twigg, on peace though more broadly, we understand that the current government shares our view that Hamas can have no role in the future governance of Gaza, but we've had very little detail on how they plan to help achieve a post-Hamas Gaza. Hamas has shown to have a callous disregard for human life through its appalling actions of the 7th of October, persistent use of Palestinians as human shields, and the murder and mistreatment of the hostages. Hamas has extensively repressed civil society in Gaza, stamped out political opposition, and arbitrarily arrested journalists. So what discussions has the Minister had with Israeli and regional partners on the future governance of Gaza? I'm going to keep going because I am very, very short of time. Promoting peace in the region is an aim we all aspire to in this House. The Abraham Accords signed in 2020 were a welcome step that normalised relations between Israel and the other regional actors. We celebrate the success of the Accords and encourage more countries to normalise relations with Israel as a potential route to a broader peace. Building on the Accords presents an opportunity for greater shared prosperity, which of course we want and hope will mean real, tangible benefits for the Palestinian people too. During our time in government, Mr Twigg, we took steps to try and preserve stability in the occupied Palestinian territories. Between 2021 and 23, the UK's Conflict, Security and Stability Fund helped over 18,000 Palestinians at risk of eviction to protect their property rights. We strengthened economic opportunity by funding key water infrastructure and launched the UK Palestinian Tech Hub. Between 2015 and 20, UK ODA supported 70,000 children to gain a decent education. And UK ODA also supported the Middle East peace process, a £30 million programme that ran between 2015 and 19. Of course, the UK is a party outside of the region, but it's an important player with key historical links that act as a connector. So I'd like to ask the Minister, what is he doing to ensure we continue our role as a trusted partner, supporting normalised relations and a greater peace in the region? But of course, the most pressing task is ensuring that the fragile peace holds. And we must shift our eyes to the reconstruction of Gaza once we reach the subsequent stages of the ceasefire agreement. So I'd ask the Minister, what role does he envisage the UK playing in the reconstruction of Gaza? How will we work together with regional allies, and what is his response to the paper produced by the Cairo summit? We must also understand what the ODA changes mean in practice for programmes in the region, and will he see funding for the OPTs drop following the announcement? For a lasting peace, Palestinians need the same liberties their neighbours enjoy in Israel. This involves reforming the Palestinian Authority. We want reforms to continue, including on transparency, fighting corruption and improving public sector efficiency, which we supported last year in government. So as I move to conclude, Mr Twigg, very conscious of the time, I think it's important to recognise if the Palestinian Authority is to have an expanded role, it needs to implement very significant reforms on welfare, education and demonstrate a commitment to democratic processes. And so we have an incredibly fragile ceasefire agreement. We must all work to protect this. The government must redouble its efforts to preserve the viability of the two-state solution and ensure the UK plays its part in helping to lift the people's eyes to a brighter future.
Minister. Can I just ask the Minister, bear in mind, I want to call the Mansfield about 28 minutes past.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Mansfield, for securing the debate, and I'm grateful to all of the honourable members for showing their valuable and thoughtful perspectives. I'd like to pay a particular tribute, if I may, Mr Chairman, to the member for, in fact, my honourable friend for Oxford East, who has done so much in these very difficult months in which we have both been ministers, and much of what I'll be able to say about what we are doing in the region is a result of her efforts, and I'm very glad to be sharing Westminster Hall with her. Securing peace in the Middle East, Mr Chairman, is a priority that I know we share across this House. The agreement to end the fighting in Gaza was a major step forward. As many have said, ending combat operations and increasing aid for Gazans as well as the release of hostages, 38 so far, was vital. The situation, as many have referenced, is incredibly sensitive at the moment. I will not provide a detailed commentary on the talks which are ongoing today in order to try and transition into phase 2. As we have said repeatedly, and as I said this morning to the Foreign Affairs Committee, we do want to see talks move into phase 2 and indeed into phase 3. The ceasefire has made an enormous difference, both to the lives of Palestinians and to Israelis, and we want it to continue. Many members have spoken about the deficit of trust. We think that a ceasefire going through all 3 phases with all of the difficult politics and all of the difficult compromises that will require is a vital part of building trust between the 2 communities. The Prime Minister has been absolutely clear. The decision to block aid going into Gaza is completely wrong. Aid should not be used as a political tool. And I've made some comments this morning about the restrictions on energy as well. The topic of this debate is, of course, the International Fund for Israeli-Palestinian Peace. We are supporters. I am committed, the Prime Minister is committed, and the Foreign Secretary is committed to convening the meeting that many have discussed. I'm not in a position today, given the developments in the region, to commit to a time or to a cast list for that meeting. We want to make sure that this fund, that this meeting, will have the desired effect in building trust across the 2 communities. And we will need to be sensitive to the circumstances in the regions when we do so. I will.
Thank you. Can I put on record my thanks to him and the leadership and the work that he's done, and particularly in keeping us abreast of the ongoing situation. It's right that the UK take concrete steps to support peace, including, for me, the revitalising of the Abraham Accords, which of course is about normalisation of relations. Does the Minister agree with me, therefore, that peace-building funds that rebuild Gaza is not just for humanitarian efforts, but as a regional step towards normalisation of peace and an independent Palestinian state free from Hamas? That providing infrastructure, homes and hope will sustain peace efforts and normalise reality of a 2-state solution?
My honourable friend from Bury North talks about infrastructure, homes and hope, and it is indeed those 3 elements, in particular the hope, which is so missing at the moment. I think it's important to make a distinction between the vital humanitarian aid into Gaza and efforts to support civil society, which necessarily will be less focused on the immediate humanitarian support required, less focused on the reconstruction, which my honourable friend rightly says will be necessary in Gaza, and is more focused on the efforts that many have referred to as bottom-up, trying to ensure that both communities see bridges to each other. And I very much agree with my honourable friend from Durham North, there is a terrible deficit in trust and in confidence across the 2 communities. When I travelled in opposition shortly after October 7th, 2 months later, it was so striking for both communities how little they believed in common at that moment, and rebuilding that trust will be vital. I'll have to give way here first, but I will to you after I've made a little more progress.
Can I remind members that their intervention should be brief? Jim Shannon.
Minister, thank you very much for a very comprehensive answer. Minister, when it comes to the monies, and there obviously has to be many of them to make sure they can go far and wide. I think the issue has been debated in the past. It has been seconded by certain terrorist groups. So what we need is transparency to ensure that the monies that are allocated can be safely distributed to the right people for the right purposes.
Minister.
I agree, Mr Chairman, with the honourable member. It is vital that aid goes to the purposes for which it's intended. To be clear, this international fund we would imagine being of a much smaller magnitude than the much larger funds that would be required for humanitarian assistance or indeed the reconstruction of Gaza. I want to turn quickly, if I may, Mr Chairman, to some of the very important questions that were raised, in particular from the spokespeople for the 2 opposing parties. In relation to what assessment we make of the various proposals, we welcome the Aaron Plan. We think it has considerable merit, and we think it is a good place to start in thinking through some of these vital questions of reconstruction and indeed the future governance of Gaza. And I'm happy to confirm to my Conservative colleague that we do indeed see no role for Hamas in the future governance of Gaza. We think that the Cairo summit made important breakthroughs. We will be discussing this at the G7 meeting, and it is being discussed, as many members will be aware, over the coming days by negotiators from a range of countries in the region. The Palestinian Authority is clearly a very important party in all of this. They are the authoritative voice for the Palestinian people. We are committed to supporting them through their journey of reform, which is vital and necessary. We've given £5 million to support the reform initiatives of the Palestinian Authority. There are a range of views about the future governance of Gaza and the role that the Palestinian Authority might play, and some of these were discussed at the Cairo summit. And we will play our full role as the opposition spokesperson, and many members would expect, to try and ensure that the provisions in place for the future of Gaza can ensure the governance and security both for the people of Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories, and indeed the Israelis themselves. I want to just pause briefly to make some general remarks about conflict prevention and civil society, to welcome the work of the APPG and say I would indeed be very happy to come here more about their work. Civil society has a vital role to play. We will support it fully. We recognise the sensitivities on both sides. I think several members made reference to Senator Kerry's comments that the problem was not necessarily in 2014 a gulf in the positions, but a gulf in the trust, and we do see that civil society plays an important role in that. I want, before passing back to the member for Mansfield, I do want to say... I will.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I hear what he has to say in respect of how we can move towards a path towards peace. However, would the Minister agree with me that there must be steps taken to ensure that Israel is accountable for its violations of international law? And in doing so, will the Minister commit to taking steps to begin ending the UK's military support to Israel?
Mr. Chairman, I have given some comments on questions of international law and indeed on arms suspension, both in the Chamber and this morning in the Foreign Affairs Committee. And with just 1 minute left, I would say I stand by those remarks. I want to say just a little bit about some of the life-saving assistance that the member for Oxford East was responsible for when she was the Minister for the Development, and which continues. That included an announcement at the end of January for further 17 million in funding to ensure healthcare, food and shelter reaches tens and thousands of civilians across the occupied Palestinian territories. I would just like to reassure members that it is absolutely right that we think, as the member for Mansfield has said, about the route out of this conflict, but we will not forget those in desperate need at this moment, and our support will continue. I was asked by colleagues about what the impact on the reduction in odour might be, and I would just reiterate what the Prime Minister has already said. We are focused on the needs in Gaza, and we will seek to preserve our efforts through any changes. UK support has meant over 500,000 people have received essential healthcare. 647,000 have received food. 284,000 people have had improved access to water, sanitation and hygiene services. Humanitarian needs, however, cannot be solved by short-term solutions. So I'll conclude my remarks by saying we do reaffirm our support for a credible pathway towards peace, leading to a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians live side by side in peace, dignity and security, and we agree in the merits of an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian.
Mansfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Twigg, and I'd very much like to thank all of the honourable and right honourable members who have contributed meaningfully in the spirit of today's discussion. That is with a genuine commitment to peace at heart. I think that very few conflicts inspire more stronger opinions and polarised views than the ones that we've discussed today. And I'm really pleased that so many members have moved beyond talking points and shared their sincere views on how an international fund could improve the lives of everyone in Israel and the Palestinian territories. I do hope the Minister will meet again with MPs to discuss our future commitment to the fund, and I hope he'll encourage the Foreign Secretary to raise the matter at the G7, building off the commitment was made last year, and with the aim of coordinating and institutionalising the UK government's support for this work.
The question is, this House has considered the potential merits of an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace. Many of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. Sitting stands adjourned.